Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for giving me an opportunity to share with you my views on how technology is disrupting the education. I've divided my talk into three segments. First, I'll build a case for what's propelling demand for online education. Then I'll spend some time discussing the pitfalls of the current online education and how Acadgild, a company I co-founded, is addressing these shortcomings. And finally, I'll spend some time sharing with you my views on the future of online education. Before I launch into my talk, the organizers have requested me to briefly describe my life's journey and how I got to where I am today and why I'm standing on this stage. My love for semiconductors sprung from my first job at Continental Devices India Limited, a semiconductor company right here, a few kilometers from where we are today in Delhi. But frustrated by lack of understanding the physics behind the semiconductors and why things were one way or the other way, I took a journey to US to get higher education and get a master's degree in solid-state science. And my first job was at a company called NCR, where I developed cutting-edge technology that led to what you all have, what we call USBs or flash memories, where you store most of your photos, data, and videos today. Intel picked me up from NCR because they were also pursuing the same field for consumer applications. And I spent bulk of my career at Intel leading the Pentium processor, amongst other things. Then I left Intel and donned a hat of reinvented myself to be an entrepreneur from an intrapreneur and did two startups. One company, NextGen, where I had this discomfort in my mind about did I really do this great Pentium because who I am or is because where I was, which was Intel. And they had, as you know, Intel is a very big company with billions of dollars. Just to prove it to me that, yes, you can do these things even in a small company as long as you have some creative set of people with good ideas. I joined a company called NextGen, where we built a Pentium killer. And we sold that company to Advanced Micro Devices, one of the key competitors of Intel, for over $800 million. Having smelled blood and tasted what a life of an entrepreneur is, there's never going back to becoming a big company guy. So now I was on to starting another company and joined about a dozen people in a nascent startup called Silicon Spice, where we developed world's first voice-over IP chip that was fundamentally in great demand by Cisco and others. And we sold that company to Broadcom for $1.2 billion. Motivated by a strong desire to contribute to India. So I grew up here, I went to Delhi College of Engineering. My fee was about 150 rupees per month, whatever that is in dollars. I think even in 1970 dollars, that would be more like $20 a month. I had this burning desire to do something for India and clearly understand how I can contribute. So I came here in 2001, 2002, talked to Narayan Murthy and Asim Premji, people I knew who we were doing business with from Intel, and discovered that software, of course, was already being done here. So the main area that I could add some value was either in chip design, product design, hardware. And that led to really formation of first an incubator called New Path Ventures, and then a venture fund, IndoUS Venture Partners, that I founded, focusing on venture investments in India. And the goal here was that in Silicon Valley, if you go there, you'll see a lot of Indians. And in fact, 40% of the startups are managed by foreigners. And in 25% of them, one of the CXO is an Indian entrepreneur. So I always wondered, why is it that we have so many success stories here in Silicon Valley and why we can't create some such success stories in India as well? And that was one of the reasons for coming here. And the second was that if we can show some success stories here in a startup world, you could have a lot of people then going into entrepreneurial type of jobs rather than joining Infosys and TCS and Reliance. They will come and start companies. So that was my dream, and that was my way of paying back. So I raised about $189 million, all mostly from Americans and pension funds, endowments, and family businesses, and brought that money here to focus entirely on investments in India. This was in 2005. I'm very, very pleased standing here today, a decade later, and looking at what's happening with the entrepreneurialism in India and startups in India and how they are progressing. It's beyond even what I had imagined in terms of the momentum this whole industry has picked up. And then the problem I faced with, as I went through this 10-year of investing, I discovered that if you really want to invest in India, fundamentally you need to be in India. You cannot sit in California and invest in India. And then I had to make up my decision whether I want to move to India and invest in India, or do I want to be back home with my family, and I decided the latter. But now I was back in US, and the second thought came was, look, this is a country that adopted me, and I've been here longer in US than I was in India. What have I done for them? So that thought really went back initially, believe it or not, into out of frustration and disbelief that every other week in a prominent newspaper in America, there's a news about how American kids are ranked 150th, 160th, or 190th out of 200 nations that they go and do ranking for math and science and things of that subject. So it's quite frustrating to live there and to be in the center of innovation in Silicon Valley and create Pentium-type processors, and then be reading this news that our schools are so bankrupt that they are not able to teach proper STEM education to our kids. So I actually wasted 1 year investigating how do I make a difference. And the reason I say I wasted is because the K through 12 education in America is a hard nut to crack. It's a bureaucracy which is as worse or perhaps worse than Indian bureaucracy. It has unionized schools, student teachers unions, and school districts, and a big collusion with the publishers. And it's a very well-established system where everybody's making a lot of money and scratching each other's back. And there's very little incentive to really change the paradigm unless the ground under them is shifted somehow. And that's what we're going to try to do eventually. But I shifted my gears and said, okay, I'm still interested in education because that's really been the password to my success and many others like me. What else can I do? And that really was the birth of Acadgild with Vikalp and some other co-founders to initially address higher education, but primarily in software programming skills that we want to teach to kids. So that's really a brief on how I got to where I got to, standing here today. So I truly do believe, and I think I've put down somebody's quote here, which reflects my belief that the single most valuable resource this century is going to be education. And one would ask why? What about this century? What about last century? What about century before that? Why is it so more important today? And the reason for that I'll describe to you is technology. And the world is moving very fast, and we are entering an age of information, already are in it, and creating the world to be a digital world. And in that world, things will move faster, and you'll have to be educated yourself much faster and more repeatedly. And so things are going to be shifting. So the additional thing for India is this whole fact that we have about 800 million out of 1.2 billion people who are below the age of 35. And this is a critical mass of people who need to be brought into the information age because we have to move with the lockstep with the rest of the world. And the only way we are going to really do that is if we're going to transfer them to become knowledge workers. And to educate such large number of workers is not going to be possible by opening schools and universities. That will require you to almost open one per day here in order to even keep up with the demand. So one of the most cost-effective way of doing that, we believe, is to deploy technology for online education. And that's where Acadgild fits in, and we are laying that foundation and to meet that crucial need. Leveraging online courses, millions of students will become continuous learners, cultivating new skill sets throughout their careers. Now, in USA, we are facing a very different kind of crisis that you may not all be aware of. There's a very major crisis going on in USA. And that's really come about from the fact that we had a financial crisis in 2006, 2007, brought about by some crazy things that our financial institutions were doing. But in that burst of the bubble, the state budgets were really reduced significantly. And one of the things that affected was the college education. So not only they cut back on the number of students that they were enrolling from US itself, so they could make up money by enrolling more foreign students who are charged 2 to 3 times more fee than the local students are. But even the local students had to pay significant large amount of fee in order to make up for all the shrinking budget that the states had to go through. Now this created another problem because students could not afford to go to these expensive colleges, so they started borrowing money as what's called student debt. And believe it or not, the student debt in US today is close to the entire GDP of India. It's reached about $1.5 trillion. And now as students are coming out of schools after having those expensive education, they are not able to afford homes, they're not able to afford proper cars, they're not able to really live their life because it will take them 5, 7, 8, 10 years first to pay off that debt. So there's a different kind of issue which probably will lead to the same solution that we are talking about that's happening in US as well. There's another very interesting data that I ran into. Bill Gates has been with his wife actually addressing education, and I was going into his site to understand what he has learned from there, and I was shocked to find out, and I did not know this until I looked at his presentation that he had made, that the dropout rate in colleges in US, a 4-year college, only 2/3 of the kids graduate. And in a 2-year college, community college, 66% of the kids drop out in the school time. So that's a huge loss. You can imagine how much loss that is. But the most concerning thing there is that that will lead to a severe shortage of skilled labor in US. So there's huge concern that United States government has about how to address this. Now, Acadgild is trying to offer a unique online education model. I'll go into that in a few minutes to address some of the issues that I'm bringing up here. To go back into saying, so what has technology done to start enabling even for us to talk about Edtech? You know, it's a very interesting word, Ed and Tech. Tech is technology, so we're talking about education through technology. And I think people have taken it for granted, but I'll just remind you that this reason for technology to be inserting itself into education has come about from 2 observations that were made over the last 50 years. One was from my ex-boss, Gordon Moore, who was a founder of Intel. He created what's now dubbed as Moore's Law, where he said that every 18 months, the number of transistors on a chip will double. What that really means is that you were putting more and more computing into a thumbnail-sized chip, which the price is same, and therefore you're providing more computing at same price, or basically reducing the price to a point where I think a transistor now costs less than 1/1000th of a cent. 1/1000th of a cent is the cost of one transistor on a chip. And since they have billions of transistors to make chips like Pentium, that is the cost. So I think this has revolutionized and created this concept of going into the digital world. It's made chips and hardware technology a commodity. The other guy who made a very interesting observation was more recent. His name is Mark Andreessen, and he was the co-founder of Netscape. And back in '95, when he formed Netscape, that's the company that actually made the web browser or the access to internet a mainstream. Until then, it was still very limited access. And he made an observation in 2012 in a very controversial article he wrote in Harvard Magazine saying software is eating the world. And that really made a lot of people in the IT world upset, because people like us who were all non-software people, we thought, what is he talking about? We are the one who created this planet, and he's now saying that we are irrelevant. And the fact of the matter is, to some degree, he was right. And his concept was that in this new world, all industries will be transformed by software. And there will be no companies which will be a hardware company. Even a hardware company will exist only because of software. Now, software has become, as most of you know, an invisible force that's driving amazing transformation in businesses, industries, and governments. And we're talking about here in India, we're talking about smart cities. When you talk about smart cities, they can't exist without software playing a very significant role in connecting various things that exist in a city or in a house or in a town. So this particular observation is what's given rise to this enormous demand for software programming skills worldwide in order to transform all these industries, all these businesses, all these cities, all these countries into a new world of digital world. And you will have to know software programming in order to even survive 30, 40, 50 years from now. So there's a huge demand for high-skilled software individuals. And there's a study by US Bureau of Labor Statistics which says that the software engineering is the fastest growing occupation in America. And the businesses in Silicon Valley, we know, are struggling to hire enough programmers who are equipped with the right type of skills. Software, like everything else in technology, also changes very rapidly. So even if you were a student 10 years ago and learned in computer science some Java programming or C, that's no longer what's really required in the industry as the industry moves into new types of languages and new types of skills that are required. And therefore, software engineers have to constantly upgrade themselves and get new certificates, new skills, in order to stay relevant and to stay current and to stay employed. Online education is a very convenient way to allow these people to stay upgraded, because they can do that anywhere, any place, anytime, while balancing their jobs and families. So even though this concept of getting online education began to take off early part of this century, when the internet started becoming widespread, the real crux of online education in higher education started in 2012. And that really came about from a partnership which was titled EDX, created between Harvard and MIT, for offering online courses to anyone in the world who wants to take them, by putting all of their subject matter online, free for people to even access. And they called this, gave it an acronym, MOOCs, that stood for Massive Open Online Courses for Higher Education. And today there are scores of companies that are offering massive online courses targeted mainly at do-it-yourself learners to supplement the education they've already had. However, even as MOOCs enrollment, and by the way, last time I checked, it's soared up to 15 million students. So this should give you an idea of, like Harman was saying, there is a need, and there is absolutely a lot of need for online education. And thousands of courses, by the way. But there's been one very, very big issue. The completion rate of these courses in MOOCs has been abysmal. Less than 10% of kids actually complete the course. And even less than that 10% of, about half of them actually even pass. So even the ones who complete don't pass. So they really don't somehow seem to utilize this enormous capability that these institutions and other universities worldwide begin to offer over the last 3-4 years. Now, we'll go into why is that these people are not completing the courses, and why is it that they are not passing the exam. So we actually, in Acadgild, went into trying to understand that aspect of the equation. And what we discovered was that most of these people are offering their courses on a video. So you can just go online, like you watch YouTube, you can sit down and watch the video. Now, of course, you can rewind the video, you can pause the video, you can see it many more times. But we still find that one of the deficiencies of this method of teaching online is that there's no engagement. See, one of the things that the classroom offers is engagement between the teacher and the students, and the students and the students. And that element is missing. So with that understanding, we said, how do we structure an online course where we have live instructions given by mentors who teach the students as if they are live sitting in a classroom. So that's really the fundamental core of what Acadgild is and how it's different from 99% of other companies which are trying to do the same thing by offering courses in video. And it's not just, by the way, there are some Coursera type schools that will offer a class which is live, but then the size of the student class is as if you are all sitting in a stadium watching a cricket game. There are like literally hundreds of thousands of people who are taking those classes. So there's no personalization, there is no interaction in that type of environment, which also is a huge negative. And we tried to address that negative by making our classroom only 5 to 10 students. So we have only 5 to 10 students and a live mentor who comes in who teaches in a flipped class manner. So yes, we give some instructions and all the course materials on web and all the stuff is digitized, so you don't have to carry a lot of things around and you can access them on your iPhone or iPad or a laptop sitting at home or maybe standing in line in a grocery store. We don't really care. You can learn and start picking up things wherever you have time and interest to do that. But the basic 2 things that we have done is to keep our classroom or batch size very small and to also allow a person live giving the instruction. Then the third thing we looked at was, how do we value what we learn? And most of us, and today, most of the world, values it by getting a certificate or a degree. And just because you got a degree doesn't mean that you have really learned. And most of us know that. Some of us slept through some classes when we were going through school because they were so boring. We still got degrees, and in those subjects that we slept through, probably we never really got much learning from because we either had no interest or the teacher was so disinteresting, in my case that was the case, that it wasn't worth really even listening to what was going on. So the third thing that we tried to analyze was, it's not really that piece of paper that people get and take it to their employer that's important, even though that's the way the current paradigms work. What's really important is what you have learned. So with that in mind, we segmented about 1/3 of our course teaching into actual hands-on building of applications. Now, since we're teaching software, whether it's in Android or iOS, each kid who takes our course and completes our course has to go through that process. And there's a lot of hand-holding sometimes required by the mentor to teach the software programming skills. In fact, we go to the extent that we have 24/7 support available, that if a student at 2 a.m. in America is having difficulty writing his code and is just not able to execute it because of some error that is taking place and he or she does not know why, they can just push a button on the screen and get one of our experts to come online to help them overcome that issue. Now, these are not things you can do in a brick and mortar situation. So our belief is that actually online education is not only going to be the way of the future, it is a superior way of the future. It's going to do things that cannot be done in a classroom. For example, we are looking into taking our education to the next step with all the data analytics and these technologies of cloud computing. Now we are trying to get enough business intelligence to know how each kid is learning. because we understand what kind of clicks they make on their computer and how many attempts they have made to solve a certain problem, and therefore tells us who is lagging behind and who is ahead of the class, who gets it, and who is taking a little bit longer to get it. Because not each kid can move at the same pace. But this individualized instructions cannot be given in a brick and mortar classroom where you have 40 students and one teacher teaching the same subject material at the same pace to all the students. So this is the other way. This is extremely powerful medium where you can dynamically be altering the subject and instructions to each student differently in order to have them complete their education in the pace that they can. And this cannot be done any other way. So these are some of the ways that we are addressing at Acadgild and are different from the other people who are offering the same courses. And this, by the way, the other thing that I did not mention to you is we actually get feedback from our students real time, right after every class. They just online give us a feedback on saying, hey, you dwell too long on this particular subject. I would rather have you go deeper into this aspect, and that will help us more. So we collect all the data every class, and we continually refine our content and also our methodology of teaching to really suit their need. This is also something that cannot be and is not normally done in a traditional brick and mortar classroom. The aspect of, we go one step beyond the aspect of the hand-on building application. After building the application, we actually teach our students how to upload it on GitHub, which is a site where most of the software developers community in the world goes to see what other software techniques and elegant ways people do things exist. By sharing this with their peers, they can collaborate on coming up with better ways of doing software development. So this is a very powerful way now to not only collaborate with just 30 or 40 students class, you're collaborating with world at large and trying to really understand the subject matter that you're trying to learn as to how to be best and become an expert in that area. And we believe that although we give a certificate, and the certificate really is just its significance is to show that you have completed the course. But what we encourage our students to do is, when they go for a job or a promotion or to a recruiter or hiring manager, that please open up your laptop or iPad and download the application that you did when you were studying with us and show it to the person how you built it, what were the challenges, how you overcame them, how you made it more fluid and more elegant and more effective. To us, that is far better judgment of how good the student who's being hired is than a piece of paper that says he's completed the course. Now, in Acadgild, we charge about $500 to $1,000 per course. And the reason we are one of the only 2 companies in the world that exist actually who do that. There's one company in US who's also doing it. They charge $5,000 for the same course that we charge $500 for. The reason is, to do it in US with the US mentors is very, very expensive. And therefore, they have to keep their rates very, very high. We chose to build our model based on India, not for just the India, but for the global market. And why did we think we want to come to India? We all know that India has a very, very large pool of talent in software expertise. And it's also significantly lower cost than it would be in some place like US. So that is how we created this business model to make sure it's not something we are doing for joy for a few weeks or a few months, but something that is sustainable in the long term, and you can scale it to hundreds of thousands of students who will be coming to Acadgild in the coming years. And I'm very proud to let you know that the ramp up that we started in January, we couldn't meet the demand. So we've been actually running at about 40% of what the demand is, because we had to build the capacity, and that requires both capital and getting the right set of people and developing the content and things of that nature. But the primary reason so far for our slow was more of the money, because the original investors, we the founders, are putting our own money into the game to prove what we are passionate about. But the fallout rate for us is only 10%. That is, over 90% of our students actually get placed successfully in their jobs. And just a couple of days ago, Vikalp is here, we were in a meeting where we were looking at the other 9% that don't complete our course as to what the reason is. About half of them were for another reason that we can mitigate very quickly. It had to do with just the timing of when the course was being offered and the convenience of that, and we know how we can go around fixing that. And once we fix that, that number will come down to less than 5%. So MOOCs, only 5% people graduate. Acadgild, 95% of people are graduating. So that is really the flip that we have brought about in this manner. So I'd like to now wrap up my talk with my views on where I see the future of higher education as we know it today. You know, this is just a matter of time. Technology is changing every aspect of every industry you know around. You look at transportation, you have Uber and Ola, you have all kinds of e-commerce companies that are delivering things to you at home. This has all been enabled by technology. But one particular area where technology has not yet moved in and has stayed frozen in time is education. So it's just a matter of time. And I can see that. It's not a matter of decades, by the way. When I say matter of time, I can see 5 to 10 years from now, we'll be looking back and saying what a major transformation has occurred. And what is going to cause that transformation? I think one of the things that's going to cause that transformation over the next 10, 15 years is these kids, these young kids, 2, 3, 4, 5-year-old kids. I was actually at Vikalp's home the night before, and he has a daughter, 4-year-old, who actually is using iPad and iPhone and actually knows how to go into Amazon and order a doll for herself. This is absolutely was shocking to me. I was just amazed as to how easy it was for her to find the places, and she knows the words like downloading. Now, what are these kids going to do? You think she's going to be going into brick and mortar schools and be constrained by the timings and location of that and be carrying big bags full of books? I don't think that's what's going to happen. These kids are going to demand that the universities use the technology and the internet and the web and the online to deliver them all the things that they're used to delivering, whether it's games, YouTubes, food, or e-commerce. So I think a new generation is coming that will actually force universities to offer their accredited degrees online. And once the universities start doing that, which they will have to, if they have to have these students, I think it'll be a game changer. Then there won't be anymore an online degree and an offline degree, or an online student and an offline student. There'll be just basically students getting degrees one way or the other, and mostly going towards online because effectively it will become much cheaper. Now, a lot of people say, hey, that's all well said and done, but you still have to go to college to go to, if you're a science student or engineering student, or you're going to be a doctor, you need to go do practice surgery on patients and all that. I have to narrate to you a very interesting incident. My wife needed a minor shoulder surgery just about 6 months ago. And instead of going to Stanford Hospital or our local Washington hospital in this town that I stay in, Silicon Valley, they had given us an address that we didn't know and we'd never been to. It's called Surgery Center. So we just went to Surgery Center at 6 o'clock in the morning to make sure she was there ahead of time. And 6, 7, reached there at 7 o'clock. And I see a lot of cars in the parking lot. It looks like just a office building, just like somebody's office. And then I ran into one of the doctors whom I knew, who was a cardiologist, and he was also rushing in there, and he told me that this is a place where various doctors with various specialties of different kinds come in throughout the day, since they can't afford to have a surgery center, and timeshare the nurses, the equipment, and the administrative staff to do their surgeries. So I'm here to do a surgery that will go on till about 10:30, then I'll be back in my office, and I'm paying a certain amount of what I make by doing the surgery to this center who provides me with all the basic needs. Just imagine that setting up such few facilities, rather than each university having their own dedicated physical setups in these expensive real estate, where each one has to have their own lab and own science chemistry lab, that there's some time-sharing arrangement, and these are physically located for convenience for the population, so who's studying everything online but wants to go out and do these experiments in a physical brick-and-mortar structure in different parts of the city. And now you're cutting down on the cost heavily because you're saving huge amount of money in both the real estate, the number of facilities required, and also by time-sharing the capital equipment that is required to run these labs and the people that are required to run this lab. And that I see will be the future. It will be happening, even though it's very hard for people to believe. It does happen and will happen. I'll narrate to you one person whose name is Clayton Christensen. If you have not, please go read his book. It's a very thin book. He's a Harvard professor. He wrote a book 10 years ago on disruptive technologies. And what he did was he studied. He said, how is it that big companies who become very large, $100 billion, or Apple, which is $500 billion, getting to be a $1 trillion company, world's first $1 trillion company. And you could sit down and you say, how can that company ever shut down? Will there ever be a day that Apple won't be there? Well, we see in Silicon Valley every day that companies that we grew up with actually disappear. And the reason they disappear, in his thesis, was that there's always these new ideas that come in, and they take hold, and they disrupt the existing paradigms and existing established players. To a large extent, most of you know my old employer, Intel. You know, we were the big dads of creating these processors, 386, 486, Pentium, and beyond, and what I call Ferraris that would run these computers at the fastest speed you could ever imagine. And we were dominant. We had 90% of the world's market. But today, unfortunately, the computer market is going down, but Intel never made right moves to get into what's called cell phone or smartphone market. Now, smartphone is what? Smartphone is basically a computer. It's like a supercomputer in your pocket. It's about 1,000,000 times more speedier than the Pentium chip I've created in my own lifetime. And you're just carrying it in your pocket. You don't even think about it. Each one of us have it. And that is what's changing the world as we know. So I think it's just a matter of time, in my mind, that the education will radically change. And the world as we know won't exist. And I think the fallout will not be the Harvard and Stanford or IITs and these big brands where they will adapt and co-adapt and exist because of the brands they have. It is the middle-level universities. I think they are the most threatened, and literally hundreds of thousands of them will either not exist or will exist in a different paradigm than what we know today. Thank you very much.